Call to order the City of Norwood Planning Commission. Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Present.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Present.
Mr. Hockney,
Present.
Mr. Sewer.
Present.
First item, as this is our first meeting in 2023, is election of chair and vice chair. May I have any nominations for the election of chair?
I nominate Mr. Powers to continue as our chair.
I second that.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you all for that nomination and the vote. I appreciate it. Accept nominations for vice chair.
Nominate Mr. Seward.
Do I have a second?
I would second that.
So you better nominate before somebody-
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Do you accept? Okay.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes. Thank you for your confidence.
Congratulations and thank you. Next item, agenda item C, approval of minutes. The Planning Commission minutes of December 7th, 2022 be approved as prepared. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Right. Minutes are approved. Bringing us to our next agenda item, item D, public hearing. Now open this public hearing of the City of Norwood Planning Commission for a zoning ordinance map amendment. Applicant St. John Bosco Chapel Incorporated, Immaculate Conception Church requests a zoning map change for the .69 acres, 100 feet by 300 feet eastern portion of their lands, which includes 2310 Robertson Avenue and 2327 Kenilworth Avenue, from R2 residential to O office. This rezoning will not include 2322 and 2324 Robertson Avenue. Their objective is to A, have these lands rezoned to the same as their properties fronting Floral Avenue, B, facilitate design development standards for the office zone for a future recreation amenity facility where the former convent is located at 2327 Kenilworth. The Commission endorses the request. It will be forwarded on to Council for a subsequent public hearing and possible approval. To start the public hearing, I'd like to ask Mr. Skelly to introduce the topic a little more further.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Mike Skelly. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Norwood. I'd just like to provide some opening remarks, both substantive and procedural, about the application we have today. You heard from the Chair very briefly as to what the nature is about. So what I'd like to do first is point out the subject property. The subject property is located on the northeast corner of Robertson and Floral. You can see here on our zoning map, properties fronting Floral are colored orange, which designates the office zone, and then properties to the immediate east, which includes the applicant's entire 2-acre land holding, is yellow, which is zone R2. So the purpose of today's public meeting is essentially to entertain a zoning map change and to entertain relevant comments, concerns, and questions from the general public. We have hopefully people virtually attending this meeting, but we have essentially the intent is to adhere to both the zoning ordinance and the ORC for providing the opportunity for this public hearing. Briefly, with regards to the application, the subject lands are about 0.6 acres immediately to the east in yellow, which is R2, and it extends for about 100 feet of frontage along Robertson and Kenilworth, and to a depth of around 300 feet. And essentially, the purpose of the zone change for the map is to clarify both properties, including buildings, that are subject to a dual zone. And the rationale, and you'll hear soon from the testimony of the applicant, is to provide a uniform or single zone with their future intentions to redevelop. And you can hear discussions from them as to what they intend to do. So that's essentially what we're looking at right now. There will not be, at least as submitted from the applicant's 4-page narrative and justifications for this, no perceived or no proposed or requested changes to development standards or policies. It's strictly from zoning a portion of our lands from yellow to orange to have a consistent overall zoning.
Any questions for Mr. Skelly? Seeing none, I'll offer an opportunity for the applicant.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Richter with C&I Design and speaking for Immaculate Conception Campus. Mr. Skelly summarized very well what we're requesting today, and it is just to have a consistent set of requirements and a consistent zone on the campus for simplifying long-range planning and future improvements to the campus. We don't really see, if you have questions, any hardships that this creates. It does provide a simpler landscape for them to make decisions with and a consistent zone for the site. So you've seen my narrative. If there's anything that you have questions regarding, definitely happy to share and answer those.
Could you spell your name for us, please?
Yes, it's B-R-Y-A-N, and Richter is R-I-C-H-T-E-R.
Questions from the commissioners?
What are your future plans?
Right now, we're talking with the campus about possibly providing a recreational space on site. And the exact design of that is still a work in progress, but that's one of the primary things that they're looking at. And then there are some other things for staff and space on campus as well, but that primary first step is kind of what we're looking at this point.
So follow-up would be that would include, when you talk about those future plans, the removal of the convent building, or what was known as the convent building for years?
Possibly,
And
yes, sir.
also removal of the rectory building, where the priests lived, which is connected to the back of the church?
I think what we're looking at right now, no, it just is the one building that you mentioned first.
Can I do another follow-up?
Yes.
What I'm looking at, I think, includes not only the priest house, the building right behind the church, but also another building, another home that's right next to that. Is that all owned under Immaculate Conception or
Yes,
St.
sir.
John Bosco?
Yes, sir.
That is all.
It's under common ownership.
So would that home be ripped down, tore down?
That's not the plan at this point, no.
So no removal of homes on Kenilworth? On Robertson?
Robertson, yes, sir.
Robertson.
At this point, I mean, we may decide to do something, at which point we'll come back to you and talk to you about that. No, at this point, no intention to do anything.
Okay.
Could he state his name, please?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Mike Winter. I'm on the business committee for Immaculate Conception, so if you're just here to answer any questions you have. So yeah, as Brian indicated, as we have our school there, we currently don't have a gymnasium or facility for our kids for sports or for gym class or for any kind of activity. So we're just looking at the possibility, and we're working with Brian's firm to try to come up with designs and stuff that are feasible for the space that we have, and trying to look for that. And simplification of the zoning ordinance would go a long way. Plus, as I think as you look at the map, it actually the current zone actually splits a couple of our buildings, where half a building is zoned one way and half the building is zoned another, and those buildings have been around, I think, probably since the early 1900s. So not quite sure exactly how we got to this point, but just from the simplification of the overall zone, so as we look at opportunities in particular for potentially a gymnasium, that would simplify. But again, nothing has been finalized yet. We're working with Brian's firm, trying to find a suitable plan and a budget that would work for us.
Any additional questions for the applicant?
I would ask, my follow-up question would be, what does this do for your continuation of the school at that exact location? An investment would sort of plant deeper roots on that site and continuation of your school and your church facilities and all that, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right.
Chairman, will we have a time to discuss at the close of the public hearing?
Yes,
Is it-
we will
okay.
close the public hearing if nobody has any additional questions for the applicant, and then open for an opportunity for discussion amongst commissioners. Any further questions for the applicant? Seeing none? Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
May I have your card, Mr. Reynolds? Thank you.
At this time, we'll close the public hearing, and we'll open the topic to discussion with the commissioners. Any comments?
My only comment would be, and I guess, Mike, you could help me, when I look at and I don't know how we got to where we're at, but it's a split, it is split. What would happen if they'd come for a building? I'm just curious. What would happen if they came for a building permit? Okay, if it's
Yeah,
really great.
I can, it's hard to say, like, at least in my tenure here, I haven't seen something like that.
Okay.
I think it would be rather difficult, but, I assume Dan Bly has entertained that before. I know in sometimes other jurisdictions, they look at the preponderance of where the building is situated, what is the more restrictive or conservative zone. That sometimes allows for some guidance, but really, ultimately, would be Dan Bly's and the law department to figure out.
So if it's agreed to go to an O to office, which is the proposed, correct?
Correct.
What I read off the chart, there's a lot of uses, if I were a neighbor next door, that I'd say I'm not so sure I like. Where, I just, because there's a whole list of things
Correct.
that could go in there in the future.
You're absolutely right.
Okay, that's the way I read this proposal. And there's, based on the fact that they aren't proposing anything at this point, there's a possibility we'd be approving an open-ended list of things that could come back in the future. We would have no recourse. We'd have to approve it.
Correct. Now, some municipalities have encountered this, and sometimes they provide for, subtle variations on that. They might have an office special or whatever they want to even retitle it. But I don't know if that has been entertained sometimes with regards to Norwood. From looking at your zoning ordinance, I don't believe so. If it was a PUD, that would be kind of baked in to the determination to what would be considered acceptable, not acceptable.
Again, I'm not saying they're doing anything wrong here. I'm just saying, if we approve office, the way I read this, table 1137.1, everything that has a P next to it would be a permitted use.
That's correct.
Okay. I mean, most of them I think are fine. I don't think there's a list of that are really, anyway, that's.
There was a letter in our packet that we received talking, and this is precisely the same thing that was sort of in front of the commission previously, was the setback. The residence or a church use does not need a buffer from the residential zone, but an office use requires buffers in accordance with section 1151. So if we change this, the setback next to the building, to the adjacent buildings, goes into effect on this too. And
for future.
Mike, you could correct us what that setback was. We just sort of discussed on the old St. Elizabeth Church site with the person.
Kirk, let me just flip to that section. So with regards to section 1151.11, buffer and screening, if you have a commercial abutting a residential zoning district, the building should be buffered by a 15-foot landscaped area. Now, it can be reduced, but that's subject to, providing for the necessary information to the, building code official to look at. But, typically, it will be, typically 15 to 10 feet. If they're providing it, that would have to include a fence as well for the reduced 10-foot.
Mike, would it be correct to say that an alternative to changing the zoning would be for the applicant to seek a variance through the BZA for whatever use they're looking for on the site?
Correct. So hypothetically, if the planning commission and council would approve this amendment, and then the city would get a proposed application for a building, and it didn't necessarily exactly adhere to those standards, similar to any other applicant, they would still have to go to the BZA to seek relief, not necessarily guaranteeing the relief, but they would have to make a valid request and why they would not meet that in any other kind of mitigating circumstances that there might be deserving of.
What about with the current, if the current zoning stayed as is, could the applicant still seek to pursue this project through a variance with the BZA?
Correct. So there's nothing changes at this point. I think right now, with regards to extending the church/school operation, and again, I was looking through the zoning in terms of the first question is how Dan Bly would view it, whether it's more considered as a public-private elementary school, which is a permitted right by right, or is it under the interpretation of a church, public use, which are conditional uses. So that's the first hurdle, which would, again, require a separate public hearing. But any sort of design-related elements would also have to go to the BZA for dimensional relief.
Okay.
I just want to follow up on if they remain just like they are, because it sounds very familiar to another proposal that we had that actually we recommended leaving it like it was and not changing the zoning because it would actually be easier to come back with a change under the present conditions that it's an R2. If they really are talking about the two buildings, the convent and the, what's the other building? Convent and
The rectory?
the rectory. That's in an R2, correct? The limitations on setbacks, et cetera, would be less if they came in and it would just be a proposed change. And I guess I'm trying to make sure that, I know we've caused an issue because it's a split zone. But I'm not so sure it really causes the applicant, if that's what they want to do, because I think we all want the school to stay, et cetera, et cetera. We want to help them, but I think if it goes to office, there are some conditions that make it tougher in the future and more expensive, I believe, but.
Yeah. So if I can illustrate, the camera. So at this point, what you see in pink is the requested proposal. So the convent to the north, fronting Kenilworth, is entirely within R2. This building, and I'm not too...
It's elementary school.
Thank you. So the eastern half of the elementary school is zoned R2, and then a portion of the church, and I guess the breezeway connecting is also partially that under dual zoning, and then address 2310, Robertson, is entirely R2. So you do have at least one entire building, and again, I don't know what the plans are, we haven't really heard, but that in itself would make it difficult. But going through at least the BZA would be the appropriate relief mechanism to seek that. Obviously, having it under one zone eliminates that.
Okay. Okay.
Barney, you mentioned multiple uses that you felt would potentially conflict or cause the neighbors to have concerns, and you listed, you had a list of them. Is that something, I mean, is this something we look at and say, well, we can approve this contingent upon eliminating these uses or removing these uses from that list?
I don't believe that we would be able to do that because I think it's either placing it into the new zone or it isn't.
Okay.
I don't think we have a zoning classification that will allow us to split it that way. Mike, do you concur with that?
Correct. So if the option was to almost come up with a compromise solution or a compromise zone, better definition, it's almost a whole cloth. We would have to, as I mentioned, it will be a variation of office, and then we would have to create the supporting development policies, lot area, setbacks, and the range of uses that we could allow. So, for example, when we, back in 2013, considered the adaptive reuse for cornerstones, that was a smart solution to, broach those two. So irrespective of zoning, we created these opportunities. But in this case, if they wanted that, as we just make a compromise zone, we would have to, as a whole cloth, redraft something appropriately for that. Okay, that's not what the applicant is asking for.
Thank you.
Again, I hate to keep, but what they're asking for is for us to change it to one zone, office zone, without any commitment that the school and the church are going to stay there. So once we change to an office zone, they could sell it and put in a veterinary hospital. I mean, that's just what could happen if we do that. So I'm just making sure that as we make a decision here that we know what and I understand the commitment they made here verbally, but that's not a formal application to Dan Bly. So that, again, I want them to stay. So, and I do agree with what the mayor said, that the minute they can make the commitment to that investment, that probably is the best indication that they love the location, they plan on staying. So, again, this is just, as we make this decision, we know what we're opening up to, because I don't think there's any way to put enough conditions on this, at least the way a little bit I know about this, the process. Mike, I agree with you. I think that, I thought, Mayor, you were actually asking, is there a way we could limit the approval on the office? And I don't know that there is, because we've just modified that chart with all the uses.
Conditional uses, yeah.
Unless, Mike, unless you think there is.
No, like I said, you don't have a appropriate alternate zone we could guide them into at this point.
What about a PUD?
A PUD could work, but I think at least in terms of timing, again, I don't know what the applicant's timing, at least the benefit with the PUD, it merges both the uses and the development schemes. So that is a huge win for the applicant. But in terms of, starting as of tomorrow, we would have to essentially create something similar, which would be overlaying a PUD designation on this, which is also a zoning map change. So, and again, at the end of it, it's hard to say what's more controversial, but a PUD definitely gives them a lot, even further flexibility, potentially.
I just wanted to bring up a couple things that could happen.
Yeah. Any other discussion? Okay. Seeing none, I'll entertain any motions on the topic.
make the motion, even though it sounded like I was totally against this, that I would like to make the motion that the Planning Commission recommend that the zoning ordinance map change for St. John Bosco Chapel, Inc. be changed to office. Is that the blank I need to fill in there, Mike? I'm not sure.
It would be one of those items in the parentheses that immediately follows. So either continuance of the public hearing, endorsed, denied, or modified.
Subject to the following conditions. I'm not sure. I didn't know if you wanted me to read the entire preceding proposed amendment. I mean, in a nutshell, for me, it's creating one zone, an office zone.
If you made the motion to endorse the change, that would be to change it from the R2 to the office. If you made a motion to deny it, that would keep it as is. If you made a motion to continue, a motion for a continuance of the public hearing, that would put it off to another date.
I could make the motion to approve the change to the office.
Okay, in that case, you would make the motion to endorse the change.
Endorse the change.
So Mr. Sewer has made a motion that the Planning Commission recommend that the zoning ordinance map change for St. John Bosco Chapel, Inc. be endorsed. Do I have a second? Hearing none, I'll entertain an alternative motion.
I would make a motion that we continue this public hearing for further discussion.
You've closed the public hearing.
So you
But-
can't continue it?
You can continue the meeting.
We can continue the topic to another meeting.
I would make the motion that we continue it to another meeting.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Jeannie Sickinger,
Yes.
Tom Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Motion passes. Topic will be continued to a future meeting.
Can I make a motion for a 5-minute recess?
Yes, do I have a second to do that?
I'll second that.
Second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll to put us into a recess?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger.
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
We'll stand at a recess until 4:04.
Powers,
Present?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger.
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Present.
Mr. Sewer.
Present.
Thank you.
Moving on to item E, old business, ongoing zoning ordinance amendment review.
It is not recording. Now we're back.
We're recording?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, moving on to item E, old business, ongoing zoning ordinance amendment review, discussion of second consolidated draft zoning ordinance amendment, see attached 12/6/2022 revisions. Staff was directed at the November meeting to draft policies regarding electric vehicle charging stations, which are now included in the latest draft. Mr. Skelly, would you like to discuss that briefly?
Sure. So at the November meeting, we were continuing on the overall discussion of the second amendment to our zoning ordinance. And then at the tail end, we were given a request to look into the concern of having essentially the conventional gas station tied in with a electric vehicle charging station. So the discussion was there was merit in separating those two uses out, but then also creating decent policies to regulate EV stations. So we had, I think, one draft presented at the November meeting. There was some discussion and, to further look at that. So what you see on page 10 and 11 of the December 6th version, starting on section 23, is the revised section. And primarily, the key changes, what you saw from back in November, was there was concern that regulating those sort of equipments when you had, let's say, less than 5, that essentially was considered overbearing and overkill. So that was removed from the proposal at the time, and then keeping essentially 2 further categories, ones that are between 6 to 14 kiosks or stands, and then anything above 15 or more that you would see in maybe a large commercial area or a office complex.
Entertaining discussion?
Yes, any questions or comments for Mr. Skelly or the commission?
Mr. Skelly, is this taken from another community's efforts in this manner, or is this all new verbiage that you're bringing to the table here?
This is, I would say, the latter. I did look at other municipalities, both within Ohio and outside. What ironically I did see was more policies encouraging and almost requiring these things. There was less about, I don't want to say negative regulations, but being where they should go, how they should go, hours of operation, all those type of things. So I believe, from what I heard from the commissioners, that was a concern. I believe that one of the biggest concerns that we did not want to see existing older / historic buildings torn down to make way for these things. That was also a concern. But I think it was my read of the commission, right or wrong, was more how do we provide for reasonable restrictions or regulations in light that we're an urban municipality, and unlike a suburban township, we do have concerns for what these things could look like, any nuisances, traffic, etc. So I did not do a thorough survey. I did not provide the results for that survey. It was more just quickly reviewing various municipalities. I might have reviewed, 5 or 6, and then cobbled together what I saw would fit the commission's needs. But again, if you'd like to see more research, I'm happy to kind of go through my notes, if I can assemble that or prepare additional results and bring that back to the commission.
Mike, could I ask what an LU chart is?
Land use chart, sorry.
So
It's interesting, as you mentioned, this is written in a restrictive manner, and most of the stuff that you have read is more of encouraging these EV stations to be placed in the communities and just setting guidelines for where they can and cannot be.
Correct. So whether it's the political environment we live in, concerns for climate change, whatever, a lot of the municipalities were almost requiring that for certain larger developments. You had to have these things. We're taking the approach that if you do have them, here's what we are going to require in terms of regulations. So that's the approach I took for what's here.
Is there any opinion of the commissioners that we should be doing just what other communities are doing and stating that they need to have these within new developments? Nobody want to touch that?
I'll put a comment on that. You know, during the last several years, there has been a lot of encouragement for electric vehicle use, creating those charging stations. At some point during this process, we're going to hit a tipping point where the encouragement is no longer necessary, and these are going to be everywhere because the use is going to be there. You know, if you look at what you see General Motors, Ford putting into electric vehicles, we're going to see an enormous number of those vehicles come online over the next couple of years, which means the demand for these is going to be much, much higher. So, you know, when I look at what do we need to do in our zoning over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I do see less of that need to encourage it and tell the developer, hey, you need to put this there, because the developers, if they want to have the ability to attract high-quality tenants, high-quality purchasers, they're going to put those things there. I don't see that encouragement is as necessary as it has been in the past. And so I think that long-term, this is probably the correct approach.
Because some of the comments you guys made last time about it were, you did not want to see great big parking lots of just EV stuff. You wanted it to be part of whatever the development felt the need was. You don't remember that?
I do.
Okay. You're shaking your head now.
Well, I'm thinking about what you're saying, what she's saying, what he's saying. I mean, Norwood has to, you know, one of the things that we've done in the city of Norwood is, I feel like, been behind the curve for the last 20 years. New developments, new things happen, and Norwood is very slow to embrace any of that. Because, well, it's going to happen, but why should we don't need to be on the front edge of that. And there are certain times where I think that's absolutely right. And then there are other areas where I say, well, why aren't we on the front edge of that? Why aren't we taking a leadership role? We're a community of people that learn, and they're knowledgeable, and they understand what the trend is and where things are going. Why shouldn't we, Norwood, be involved in setting some guidelines to say this is, I don't disagree with the guidelines that are here, but these are guidelines that are put as basically restrictions instead of, you know, this is written as restrictive instead of promoting it. Whether it promotes it by the way it's written or whether it restricts is two different things. I think I totally agree with Mr. Powers that hotels have to put charging stations in now, or they get less. It's required. I mean, every hotel is going to have charging stations somewhere close to them. Restaurants, it behooves restaurants to be located close to where these charging stations are. Myers, all these large parking lots are going to have that because that's what is needed to draw the people in. So I don't disagree with putting, you know, restrictions in. My biggest part is I don't know that it's really putting restrictions in as it is providing guidance to people on how they can and how they should proceed with putting these stations in. And I do think this provides guidance. I don't think this promotes them going out and getting the electric vehicle recharging station grants. There's tons of them out there, and there seem to be more and more coming. That's government money that's being spent on these things. So,
If I can offer, again, we can put those sort of, and again, the reason I did not do that, because that to me, I wasn't tasked, and that ventures more into making policy determinations. But if the Planning Commission is interested in that approach, another way of doing that is maybe tweaking the PUD requirements or even our provisions for community revitalization area CRAs, tax abatements, and requiring that as part of the incentive. Mm-hmm. So if someone is going to file a PUD, as an incentive, they have to provide X amount of EV stations, or if the city is going to entertain a CRA, they have to, as an incentive, provide X amount of EV charging stations. So that would be another way to be proactive, but do it in a way where it's tied to something that we're giving them.
I like it.
that sounds like we are twisting their arm to put them in. If we are tying it to CRAs. And-
Yeah.
And that's really the question that it comes down to, or that I'm throwing out at the commissioners is, are we interested in moving in that direction where it's innate, it's intrinsic, I guess, it's going to happen, we know that from the way it's blowing, so I think we are probably going down the right route for what the Planning Commission is trying to do, which is set some guidelines for people with charging stations at this time. And I think what you have written here gives a good criteria for that. It might be something we have to build on in the future, because we know it's coming. Were there any, I didn't see any specific, I know you had a couple of things crossed out here. There was nothing specifically that jumped out at me. I know it states in here that, shall be separated a minimum of distance of 50 feet from any public street or intersection. I'm not sure, it's crossed out. I suspect that there was some reasoning behind that, but other parts of it seem fine to me, unless other commissioners have.
And to give credit with credit due, so BZA member Andrew Moore really provided a lot of both the incentive in terms of time to look at this and provide other examples, et cetera. And again, he was pretty emphatic saying, that was overkill. But, I recall at the end of it, when we were going through various policies, he seemed happy in terms of, ultimately, whether through this meeting, I may get an email from him or subsequently have it. But I think that was his main concern, that more for the smaller ones, including, questions about if you would have maybe one or two charging stations in your residence, in terms of that was something really that shouldn't be captured in the zoning ordinance. So that was his, at least my understanding, his main concern.
Any additional comments or discussion? Well, I will say I would like to spend a little more time reviewing the EV policies and take an opportunity to see what perhaps some of our neighbors are doing with them. And so I would not be in favor of moving forward with this ordinance as it's written today, just to have that opportunity to look around a little bit more and make sure we're putting the best thing forward.
So Mike, to follow up on what you just said that Andrew had brought up.
Craig, it was just clarification.
Yeah.
Was that an independent review, or would you like me to prepare some sort of quick survey and bring it back to the commission for the next meeting?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
When you were putting this together, I'm just curious. So an applicant, do you think these are permitted uses for residences? Or I see permit by right in all commercial, office, and industrial. What about residential?
And that's, it could open up a can of worms. So I think hypothetically, someone having one or two would be perfectly fine. It could be likely, we talk about the future, 5 years down the road, quite a few people might have, a Tesla for them, their spouse, and their child. So you could have three. The concern is, and we had kind of internal staff discussion, what happens if people say, well, fine, you could come to my house, whether for free or for a charge, then have access to that, facility, because then you start getting into, I think the technology is like a high-speed, whatever, charging type thing. So it opens up a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. So as a home occupation, you could have, here's a sandwich in here for half an hour, you could charge your vehicle or something. So it brings a lot of interesting ideas.
So we're a city that has very few garages that people pull in. So if someone's going to buy an electric car, my fear was extension cords across the sidewalks. You're putting the outlet in your garage by an electrician and then running the cord out. It's a very basic concern that I have, because I have no idea what the percentage is, but we don't have a lot of garages that people can park in because of the way they were constructed. I don't really have a lot of issues with what you've written here. In fact, I think you captured a lot of our discussion about not wanting Surrey Square to put in 40 of these stations and use it as a revenue base. But they wouldn't do that because they're already short as parking spaces for their tenants. So again, this is, I just think about all the things that could happen with electric vehicles. I am not against them, so I think that it's coming. Vic, you're absolutely right. So there's no
That was
doubt.
Noah who said they're coming.
Please?
It was Noah. Okay.
Any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to item F, new business. This item is just for consideration. Staff is not asking for any action. Building Department recently processed a change of use application for 1998 Lexington Avenue from a one-family residence rental unit to a short-term rental. Property is zoned R3, which permits lodging. The city does not have a detailed policy for short-term rentals, as it does for bed and breakfast inns, which is Chapter 1157.
What's the difference between a STR, a short-term rental, and a bed and breakfast? Why wouldn't they fall under the same?
I guess the answer would be, it could be whatever you would like. So it's one of those things where I think the city, and please step in, Ms. Carey, if you confirm. So I've been here just over a year and a half. There's been a lot of discussion about this. I don't believe, whether through the property maintenance or the public health department or even police, that we've had a lot of concerns about these things. Yeah, I don't know.
We've had some. We did have the police shut one down a few years ago because it was inappropriate.
A bed and breakfast or an STR?
STR. Bed and breakfast has a whole category all to its own, where it's actually labeled and defined, and this is how you go about becoming one. Short-term rental in that terminology is not listed anywhere in our code. So between the law department and Dan Bly, it was determined that, mostly the law department, that short-term rental fell under the same category as lodging, hotel, motel, which is permitted starting in the R3 zone, not in the R1, R2, RMX. So we had our first one come, and that's fine, but the people who are calling the building department are saying, I don't see anything in your code that says short-term rental. Exactly, short-term rental. And I'm telling them what I've been told, and it makes perfect sense to me. It's the same thing. It's less than 30 days. It's a short-term rental. But it would just make it, I thought that maybe you guys should know that we actually had one application. There may be others out there, I'm sure, that we don't know about, but we have had one application, and she kept saying, there's nothing in there about short-term rental. So I thought I'd bring it to your attention. Because it
As a
would make things
clarification, is this the
easy.
same as an Airbnb?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Now, a short-term rental, is there time constrictions on that? Because I'm just thinking about subletting.
This particular case, the owner's actually long-term renting it to a company, but that company is short-terming it out to other renters. They have rented her house, they are paying her, but now they're going out and advertising it, come stay here for 2 days, whatever their policy is. And before they would rent with her, they asked her to do they told her she would be responsible, I guess, I don't know, but she did all the background. She did all of the change of use and filed for it for her house. And then she went with a particular company. And so for her, it's a long-term rental, but they're using it differently. And she wanted to make sure that she was okay with that it was okay with the city with that. But I keep being asked where it is in code. What section of code is that definition? It would make it easy for our department if it were just included in the section that talks about hotel, motel kind of thing, hotel, motel, short-term rentals. which would be less than 30 days, I guess, whatever you guys were to decide.
Okay.
But this was just an FYI, because this too is happening.
Yeah. Okay. Any additional comments? Questions?
How would that be enforced if we're saying less than 30 days? How would that ever even be enforced or?
We're not enforcing it, it's just a definition of what is short-term rental.
Okay.
And I pulled
I mean,
30.
Airbnbs are becoming more and more, I'm surprised we don't have something
We have a lot of them, probably.
unpermitted. Right.
Unpermitted. I refuse to look at it, because I don't need to.
We had a discussion several months ago about this, and we had held off taking any action because there were potential state law changes. I have not seen the result of that, as to whether or not they've adopted those. So I would be interested in
And I
seeing
remember that
that.
because I remember City of Cincinnati was going through a lot of this.
Yes,
Had
I
to do
probably
with
should have
tax
started
situation,
with
didn't it?
I believe so. All right. Any further discussion?
Well, I would like to see that maybe prior to the next meeting, some information on what changes we can make to our hotel, motel, lodging rules, regulations, ordinance that potentially would address short-term rentals, and sort of could have a discussion on that, so
Okay.
I can do that with Mr. Skelly anytime, then figure out where we should or should not go.
We will have that as an item
I
on our March
appreciate it.
agenda. Any other discussion? Any other items for new business? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mrs. Sickinger,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes. We stand adjourned at 4:27.